Welcome, everyone, to What the Force, and welcome to a new episode of The Power of Myth and Symbolism in Star Wars. And with me for this segment is Ty Black. Ooh, woo!
Woo! Hello! Glad to be back.
And today, we are going to be talking about The Mandalorian as it is up and coming season 2. We have seen the trailer. We've appreciated how little they showed us in the trailer and yet how aesthetically it was good to show us Mandalorian things without actually giving really anything away. I make this joke that like Dave Filoni has fully wrapped the trust tree in bubble wrap and refuses to let anything out because he absolutely just wants us to be blown away by Mandalorian season 2.
Yeah, my first reaction to the trailer was just like texting MC like in all caps, nothing. I think that's what I said because there was nothing in the trailer, and I was actually really happy about that. I was pretty excited about that.
It just gave us like mood, really, and like couple flashy scenes, but even it cut away when he was fighting more specifically to like save that reveal of what happens right away. Like it went to black, literally went to black when he's like in that like Fight Club type area, and we get the cool scene where he pulls out the whistling birds or whatever. Child is like nope, and eggs turtles in his little shell.
Eggs.
I don't know.
That's a good way to put it.
But you know, we didn't get to see the violence. And interestingly enough, that is what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about the meaning and the symbolism of violence in Star Wars, but more specifically, how it's used in The Mandalorian Season 1. This is cool.
Yeah. This is really cool. We had a few topics kind of lined up that we wanted to talk about in relation to The Mandalorian as well. And I think when I started researching this for my video, I told MC about it, and she was like, we have to talk about that. That's perfect. What are you reading? Let me in on your secrets. And so we started researching it alongside each other in slightly different ways. So we have a lot to cover, which I'm really excited about because obviously there's only so much I can fit in a video. But I did a lot of research. So it's exciting to kind of cover that in relation to something like The Mandalorian and other Star Wars stuff as well.
And, you know, before we get into like the thesis and the topic a little bit more in detail, I did want to say Ty Black will be joining me for our Once Upon a Time in the Outer Rim segment on The Mandalorian. And so I'm very, very, very happy to have you. Unfortunately, Alex Kane is busy with life stuff. So, he said he would try and come maybe to an episode or something like that, or maybe end of season round table. But right now, just life is very, very busy for him. But we will miss him immeasurably because he did so much for this segment. He was so brilliant. So I miss you, Alex.
His appreciation of the Western genre and the spaghetti Western knowledge that he has was just, it was priceless for us because we didn't have it as much as he did. So
we're going to try, of course, to keep up with the film parallels, especially. But this might lean more into Ty and I's strong suits, which is the mythic and the metaphorical and the symbolism associated with the show. And so, you know, we might be going into full semiotic deep dives, but that's okay. I do want to give a shout out to you, of course, Ty, to say if you have not watched Ty's amazing video on the violence binary with a focus and a lens on the rise of Skywalker and what happens there, I really highly recommend it. I'll link it in the liner notes. It's just a really good intro to kind of where we came from with this topic and why, you know, this is an important thing for Star Wars especially, and really all media to understand as they try to, you know, break down what people consider to be gender binaries and more move into a fluidity of traits to do with what is traditionally violence versus innocence. And, you know, that leads us into our thesis about how Star Wars specifically needs to understand the fluidity of traits and of the violence and innocence binary to move forward in the story. And we suspect that they do very much in The Mandalorian, and we're going to talk about that. And we feel that going forward, our Mandalorian will become more caring and compassionate towards his innocent companion and son, the child.
Yeah. And yeah, there's been that kind of theory that as the child grows, kind of becoming a warrior character, most likely, that will need a balance because, as far as we know, as of this moment, Din Djarin and the child are the violence binary in this show, and we'll kind of go into more of what that really means.
Yep. And it's really, really important because you cannot have everybody be violent in a show or in a story, or it kind of throws off the dynamic of the show. You can be a mix. You can have a violence and like caring and compassion and kind of those innocent traits in all the characters or in the two main characters. But to just go in one direction and have everybody be violent, it throws it off from a hero's perspective. Yeah,
it does. So I guess the first kind of question is, like, why is violence used in the story and how does it relate to the hero? Because violence is used in a very, very specific way, and it's used in story a lot more often than I think people realize. I think that people don't realize that, like, violence doesn't happen for everyone in everyday life all the time if you compare it to, like, a hero's story.
Yeah.
A typical, like superhero or some kind of fantasy sci-fi hero or something like that. It's just not the same at all. But there's a reason why heroes have such violent stories. And one of those reasons is just the sheer, like, psychology of it, which is that it's something that everyone can relate to. And physical struggles are easier to relate to than emotional or spiritual struggles that require a lot more explanation and a lot more context, I think.
And story itself is used as a way to, you know, in a almost like a holodeck type way or an imaginary way, go through the binary of good and evil, of violence and innocence, of these opposites that exist in ourselves, and see them played out in the story and not necessarily have to go and do those things ourselves, right? It's a hyper version of the battlefield of life. A person may deal with a violent situation one or two times in their life, or maybe all the time, but, you know, it's not every waking moment, right? Hopefully for you.
Yeah, some people have commented that, like, they're like, oh, I experience violence all the time. And okay, yeah, that's not, like, everyone's experience typically. And it's not in the same way that it is depicted in story. It's not the same way it's depicted in, like, superhero movies that are hyper violent, for example.
Yeah. Or in Star Wars, where literally like they aren't literally there isn't a day without violence for our heroes in a galaxy far, far away. Yeah.
Exactly.
I do want to talk a little bit about violence in media just briefly before we get too deep in this topic, and just say, like, there is a correlation. And that's not to say causation. There is a correlation. There's a connectiveness to how violence happens in media. So that's everything that's, you know, every type of media in existence. That violence in some ways does affect humans. But it's always in relation to other factors that are involved. it's a correlation again, which just means that it happens in tandem with the increase of violence, but they don't know necessarily what the other mitigating factors are. They suspect that people who are deeply affected by media, who then commit violent acts, are maybe already prone to that, and it's just something that tips them over the edge or whatever. That's not causation, right? So especially stylized violence becomes symbolic, not something that is direct. I think the more hyper-realistic it is, the actually harder it is for our brain to separate it from the... it becomes closer to us than, say, stylized violence, which creates sort of an artistic barrier. And again, like the closer we are to it, the more from a media perspective we are affected by it.
Yeah, it's certainly a variable. And like for some people who grow up with like more violence in their cartoons might be affected by very, very differently than someone who is introduced to a lot of really hyper-violent media later in life. And like none of that is very much like, you can't study all of that the same way, and it's just a variable in how people are going to act. And I even said this in my video. I did pose the sort of the statement in the very beginning, because when anybody ever talks about violence in media, they don't talk about violence and how it is used in the story and how it affects the story and how it affects people like in a more mythical way. They talk about it in terms of, is it going to affect people to become violent, which, you know, you just stated it's not necessarily a direct correlation, but it is a variable. And I definitely think that, you know, from all of my research, I think that it's productive to look at both. But I also think that, like, for our purposes of like looking at this in terms of Star Wars and whatnot, and that sort of violence that's in Star Wars and not like hyper violence, it's definitely more productive to say, okay, well, what does it do culturally? Like, what is it saying to us? Not is it making people...
and about the story itself, right?
Yeah, about like, the story. What
is it saying in the symbolism and how it is used in the story, and then what does that say about us from a collective culture perspective, right?
How does it reflect us as opposed to how does it affect us? Yeah,
exactly. And like, I do want to say, like, a factor in whether you're going to be more prone to commit violence would be like how you're raised, what your cultural values are, what your parents taught you, whether you experienced violence growing up, etc. Like, all of these are factors into it, right? Media and violence could just show you, you know, that these things are options, but it's all of the other things also involved in your environment. And yeah, it's a reflection of the society that you live in, how prone to violence people in that society live.
Yeah.
But we're not talking about that, like, literal 40-year-old argument since the studies of violence in media and whether it affects us. We're not talking about that aspect of it this episode. We're going to be talking about what it does to the story and the symbolism within it. And I think that that's just like really, really important to talk about.
I started researching this topic, and I have to say it was incredibly hard to find anything about this. There are a like handful of articles and books and kind of research, like very, very niche type research that is done, and they all sort of reference each other. So it was very weird to kind of like look at this from like a film theory perspective or a psychoanalytical perspective, because you're trying to piece together threads that are not normally pieced together, because most everyone wants to talk about how does violence affect the viewer. So I did a lot of digging on this whole topic and found some very, very interesting things. And the most interesting thing to me was that all of this research ultimately led to this question of, yeah, sure, we have like aestheticized violence that are used in these ways in these stories. However, the ultimate question kept being like, what about women using violence, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so that became this idea of like the violence binary. So that's kind of what led me down this whole journey into
Mm-hmm.
this. And once you start thinking about it as a binary, it's like, oh wait, everything is like a binary story. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, like Jung talks about the binaries of our life, and it's how we navigate forward versus back, and evil versus good. Whether we are going to lean into our shadow versus our conscience. It's all about that, and this is just another symbolic way for us to have the same discussion that we have a lot of, which is how do we deal with the binary in ourselves? And in so many ways, it's a hyper meta version of, the Force, the light versus the dark, right? What is the dark? It is violence. What is the light? It is compassion. It is love. It is this innocence, and I think it's just going to be really, really interesting as we dig into it. So where did all of this kind of, I guess, like setting the framework, why is it in our heroes' nature to go through violence, to be violent in their journey?
Yeah, because if you think about like the oldest mythologies, it's always been very much hunter-gatherer, even kind of societies and whatnot. Men had all these exciting stories when they came back from hunting, right? Mm-hmm. There's like, I chased this thing. It was this big. It was, big fish stories. Those are exciting things. People like to hear about these experiences. And most of our mythology is kind of based around these people leaving the home and then coming back. This is all like Campbellian and Jungian and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And it's not the only lens to see it through, but it is certainly something that contributed to heroes consistently being these like physically violent characters. And it is seen as like a good thing, right? It's that they started out as weak and then became strong. They grew as a strong, protecting person for not only his loved ones, but his community, right? Mm-hmm. And you see that story happens over and over and over again because it is so easy to relate to no matter who you are, no matter what community you are in, because it's that physical struggle is just very relatable.
Yeah. And it's also symbolically overcoming the dragon, slaying the dragon it's
psychological. Yeah.
It's psychological. It is overcoming our demons and putting them in their right place. I talked about this with the Blast Point Scouts when we covered the Ewok journeys, the Ewok adventures. And part of the big battle is to slay the giant creature in the cave in the first one, in the Caravan of Courage. And it's, that's part of it is like you have to go and face your darkest fear in the darkest part of yourself and slay that dragon or that ogre or that creature to be able to emerge an adult. That's part of the, journey through adolescence and into adulthood is putting that, is overcoming the animalistic part of ourselves so that we can exist in society. But we can never forget that we're also that thing in the cave.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say too. Yeah, it has evolved as a story. Like obviously at the very beginning of that conception, it was just like, you go and you kill that thing, but then that story changes and it becomes, okay, well, there's a subversion that happens in the story because people become more aware of the fact that this is something that if everybody's slaying the dragon, why can't I control the dragon? Why can't I, harness it? Because that's power, or that's something within me that could help me, that could, that could make me more powerful. So, the story changes over time, but consistently it is that the physical prowess and the cleverness is a big thing, in sort of the modern day, sort of tricking the dragon, right?
Odysseus and tricking the Cyclops or the Hobbit. Yeah, exactly. Like, and not just being violent, but being clever is also something that leads into it. But also, the dragon maybe no longer needs to be slayed, but confronted.
Yes.
And then organized, right? Like, are you a friend? Are you a foe? Are you part of me? Or are you put away correctly in a Marie Kondo kind of way? The violence is symbolic. It's not true violence in that, yes, the character is experiencing it, but it's all psychological. All of this stuff is psychological. And we're going to get into that, especially with the prisoner episode, because I've talked about it a lot, but it is one of my favorite episodes because of that. Yeah. Because of how the violence is used.
Yeah, I agree. That's a fun one. So yeah, let's break down just real quick the how violence is used aesthetically, because we'll be bringing it up here and there. The three ways that I think consistently that people like to talk about it in film theory is that it's used symbolically figurative, or symbolic figurative is kind of the term here, symbolic figurative. And in this case, the violence is all symbolic. It represents something else as opposed to just what is happening aesthetically. There's something that has been set up earlier in the film, and now it has a double entendre or something to that effect. There is, and there's so much fun symbolic figurative violence to talk about. I think that's probably one of those things that really has been kind of messing around in my brain since I studied this. But the second type is structural violence, which means that it's how the violence is done, like stylistically. It's how the figures move across the screen. It is how the sound is done to kind of like, excite you or to scare you or to be funny, that sort of thing. That's structural aesthetic violence. And then there is narratively essential violence, which is kind of the whole point of why is the violence there? Why is it being used? And
because
it's also
because he must slay his father, or he must fight his brother. Anakin, you were my brother. Like, yeah, because it must, right? The story has led us to this point.
Yes, and it is now the climax of the film, and there must be a lightsaber battle.
Yes, exactly. I did want to talk about the gallery episodes, if you have not watched them on Disney Plus, covering the Mandalorian season 1, are just wonderful. We didn't really cover them on the show at all, except for a little bit with the score, just because it was fascinating in and of itself. Christy and I covered that one, but there's a symbolic violence point in the saga that Dave Filoni talks about with the Duel of the Fates scene between Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon and Darth Maul. And Dave Filoni breaks down the whole scene. And I actually never thought that this was anything different, but apparently it came out of like left field for so many people. And I'm like, maybe I listened to an interview with George talking about it like so many years ago, or like maybe I just kind of always knew that this was the point. And Dave Filoni's point is that why it's the Duel of the Fates is because it's the duel of who's going to raise the chosen one, Anakin. It's not between...
I remember this.
Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon being on the same side to fight Darth Maul. It's Darth Maul basically ending up choosing who's going to raise Anakin for the fate of the galaxy. And that, that maybe Qui-Gon was a better choice to raise Anakin because he was of this newer model, this newer thinking, this more flexible thinking to understanding the darkness in yourself and being present in the moment and understanding all of those different aspects of yourself. Yeah. And he goes into the symbolic meaning of that scene so well. And so to think that there wouldn't be symbolic violence in The Mandalorian is probably just, I don't know, unrealistic.
Yeah. Yeah, the Duel of the Fates is definitely like a really good example of, I think, symbolic violence. And there's a lot of it, right? Because there's also cutting off symbolic, of a limb.
Yeah. Cutting off a limb. The other symbolic violence that comes to mind from A New Hope is Obi-Wan versus Darth Vader.
Right.
As he is attempting to delay Darth Vader. And like that, this is my last job to allow you to succeed, Luke, in life. And my only gift I can give you is my life. And also he prevents, now we know with like the iterative storytelling nature of Star Wars that he prevents Darth Vader from capturing and killing his son potentially.
Right.
So
yeah.
There's a lot going on. And also, it also has a narrative essential nature to allow the characters to escape. It's also very beautiful. But one thing that people always point out is that every lightsaber duel in Star Wars is symbolic. It's the climax of characters having, some sort of need to resolve something that is not necessarily just about the fact that they need to duel or that it is narratively essential.
Yeah.
Unfinished business, as it were.
Yeah.
And in some ways, it's kind of like the Force is fighting itself.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I like that. Traditionally, the original trilogy, and I talked a little bit about the violence binary and that relation between the innocent and violent character is really, really, really important. Everyone in the story can't be violent and everyone in the story can't be innocent. You have got to have that balance. And most of the time you have it on the same side. Like, sure, there's a villain and the villain is violent, but it's very boring to have a story about a very innocent hero fighting a very violent villain only. Mm-hmm. There has to be conflict on the side of the good in order to... Not just conflict, there has to be some kind of balance of, we have to defeat this villain. Well, how do we defeat it if we're going to remain good? That's always kind of the conflict at stake. So traditionally in these stories, like the original trilogy, and the original trilogy is absolutely perfect in kind of explaining this because Luke and Leia were that binary, and there are so amazing complexities there with both of their characters because at any time in the trilogy they are both violent and they are both innocent throughout, but Luke becomes progressively more violent. He becomes progressively more of a warrior and more of a hero character. And Leia becomes progressively more of a nurturing, romantic partner, that sort of character. And
yeah,
you even said this before we started recording. You're like, oh yeah, because Luke goes off to do the final battle in the last film, and Leia has her hair down, and she stays behind with her partner, And sure, she might wield a blaster and she might, do some cool things here and there, but she was put into that role to balance Luke taking up that lightsaber, and she was put in that role of innocence. That's what he was fighting for. He was fighting so that Leia could live, and she could have a life where they didn't have to deal with the Empire and whatnot.
And
so
it hyper fixates on that idea in the end confrontation in the throne room as Luke becomes hyper violent to protect her against his father.
Yeah.
Right? And only through taking the compassionate, loving role in that lightsaber fight does he allow his father to commit the violent act against his master.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. It's really interesting seeing the violence binary at work within just a scene.
Yeah.
it's so interesting. And there's so many ways you cannot have, well, you can, but people choose to not have two violent actors in the same scene. It takes the emphasis off of one of them. For some reason, people don't like writing that, you know? I'm not going to talk about the sequel trilogy, but the sequel trilogy is rife with this problem. They are constantly trying to balance the characters, constantly. And I think it's really funny that, like, MC also brought up before we started recording that, Leia's ultimate violent moment was when she killed Jabba. But I immediately said, well, where was Luke at that moment?
And he was entangled and captured.
He was
he was fighting for his life on the other side, but it wasn't a guarantee that he would escape.
And he was on the defense. He was trapped. He was obviously the victim. He wasn't just blindly like killing people or slaughtering people until after, on the barge, I guess, sort of like that was more where he got out his lightsaber. But, Leia had her big act of violence, but there's a balance that was had with that moment. And it's very interesting to think about that, I think.
It's very interesting to see that in the prequel trilogy, Padme is significantly more violent than Anakin. in the Phantom Menace, he is an innocent, right?
Yeah,
until the end. Until the end.
Yeah, that's true. Yep.
And then progressively through the next movies, he is the violent one, and she is the one that he is trying to save.
Yeah, because he was a kid, and like.
Yeah.
That's innocence. That is pure innocence. And that's exactly what Lucas was going for. It was, that was his version of the poetry of it.
Yep.
He was trying to show that balance, and he was doing it the only way he kind of knew how, I think.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So we do see it elsewhere, and we know the storytellers understand the symbolism of violence, especially when lightsabers are involved.
Yes.
Very apparent.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. When blasters are involved, things get a little murky, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, lightsaber fights are basically just dance-offs, right? Right? Like in a musical, when the Jets and the Sharks have a dance-off, it's a fight. But that's what a lightsaber fight is, right?
Oh
it's
my God.
Symbolic of the larger conflict.
I love
and also
me
the character conflicts.
Yes, I love me a good West Side Story reference. That is exactly what a lightsaber fight is. That's perfect.
All right, let's talk generally. How is violence used in The Mandalorian?
Oh my God. It's so interesting. It's so interesting. We talked about like how much The Mandalorian kind of calls to like Clone Wars, but Mandalorian does its own thing. I think, I used to compare it more with Clone Wars, but after doing my 2-3 more rewatches, I really think it's its own thing. And there was I never found out who wrote that one thing. I probably should have figured that out. But there was a lot of talk after the first episode dropped about how The Mandalorian did not, or about how the first episode didn't have any women in it.
But the armor was in episode 1.
And she was the only woman, and she was masked, and people had an issue with it. I think it's really interesting because like I said, I was also concerned, but everyone else that he interacted with, he hurt them or he killed them or whatever. Like, there were other people, like, in the city, that were women that were seen in the background, but they were, like, really in the background. So it was just it's very interesting because, of course, beyond the first episode, we get a lot more women throughout the show used in very different ways, very creative ways. So yeah, that beyond the first episode, I think is where you start getting into interesting ways that violence is used. Within the first episode, it's very much just like Mando is he's a bounty hunter. He kills people for a living. He has no remorse when it comes to capturing and bringing those people to where they need to go or whatever. If he's supposed to capture them without killing them.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Like, and that's pretty much how it's presented up until the child shows up.
Yeah, absolutely. And even with his agreement with the IG unit, I think it's one of those reluctant situations that he doesn't feel like he has a choice but to work with.
Yeah.
Like before, so he teams up in the first episode with IGA to kind of defeat the other mercenaries that are surrounding their target, right? The asset.
Yeah.
And like, he doesn't really have a choice.
That's true. I hadn't really thought about that, but yeah.
Yeah. But he doesn't hesitate to kill IG.
I was going to say, he still kills him at the end of the episode.
And to me, that shows me that, like, he had no qualms with, had he had the upper hand, right? But there's a different dynamic there because he already hates droids, right? So he already had provocation to kill droids, to not care. I think he was just there because he had no choice from a narrative perspective. And also it was really cool and very stylized, them working together.
Yeah.
As soon as we get our introduction of the child, what happens to our Mandalorian?
He becomes Dadalorian.
Dadalorian, yes.
Yeah, and it's so, actually, it's funny because I am thinking about this a bit more is in terms of not just like hurting or killing or whatever, but like even like the stylized violence in The Mandalorian is rather interesting in that it's all very symbolic. It's all very symbolic. I mean, yeah, like the second episode with the rhino character thing and the egg and all of that was incredibly violent. And even the child's life was kind of like at stake at some points. And it was like frightening. And he got beat to a pulp in the mud. And that whole thing was so like, it was very much symbolic of him accepting like his care for this child and accepting that it was more than just the bounty. He was going to care for this thing psychologically because it hadn't really hit yet.
Talking from a digging deeper into the symbolism of that scene specifically, this is him entering his journey, right? Because he is interacting with the supernatural in that moment when the baby, raises a little hand and lifts up the mudhorn.
Yeah.
And it's important that the mudhorn is the symbol of their family later on in the season given to them by the armorer, because this is when they become the permanent binary, right? That unit, the unit of two, because he is the violence and the baby is the defense.
Yeah.
And healing too, right? Like the baby represents healing and compassion and love. And because throughout that second episode, he's constantly trying to heal Dadalorian.
Oh, yeah.
And is unsuccessful.
I didn't think about that being kind of the first instance and that being this, like, the signet. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. So their signet is literally the violence binary.
Yeah.
If you want to look at it real symbolically.
Is that moment. Yeah. Yeah.
I love that.
And there's tons of like other symbolism that reflects what's going on in the show itself. And this episode is just ripe with amazing stuff. Like the egg that he sought was filled with this child, which is the thing that is going to nurture his soul. The egg that they grab from the cave that was the Mudhorn's egg matches the internal look of the egg when violently the Jawas crack it all open and eat the suga. Suga. But they eat it, and it looks like the inside of the child's like little carrier. Mm-hmm. It's all there.
Oh yeah, it's all there. And it's all violent. Like them eating the egg is in itself violence.
Yeah.
And it's very, very interesting how that is used to say, like, this is kind of like creepy and morbid and strange, and it should frighten children to an extent.
It's foreshadowing the next episode, which is him handing the egg over to the client. What's going to happen to the egg? It's going to be eaten by the Jawas. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right? It's going to be eaten by these creatures.
It's letting him know that the child is going to probably die if he hands over the child. Yeah.
And the child is his egg in the cave.
Yeah.
Because he is the Mudhorn now.
That's definitely an element of how violence can be used in that symbolic figurative way to imply violence and to suggest it to tell people, hey, this is something that can happen. Like, this is something that is a possibility. Like, wouldn't you be frightened? And it like raises the stakes more, but it's all done symbolically.
Yep.
It's absolutely pretty cool.
There's more symbolic like language and symbols that happen, especially in episode 3. Are we just gonna walk the season? Let's just walk the season. It's fun. That's
fine.
Like episode 3 actually has, the most homage to Hard Boiled, the Chow Yun-fat movie, because Deborah Chow specifically wanted to create those parallels. Like he returns the baby, he gets his reward of the, big thing of Beskar, the ice cream maker full of Beskar. And, he gets suited up. He's about to go off on his way, and he realizes he has made a mistake, and comes back. And actually what we see is the symbolism of violence, the discarded baby carrier in the trash. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They ate what was inside of the egg, and then they discarded the shell. Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's frightening.
Mwah.
It's great.
Beautiful. And then, he enters it, and there's this panic until he finds the baby.
Yeah. Yeah. and that's when the adventure starts of like getting the baby out, crossing over the threshold and saying, I'm leaving this life. I'm leaving this community in order to protect this child, because this is what I'm doing now. And the fun thing about it is like, I love that Deborah Chow directed this part, because, and for everyone, this is like one of their favorite episodes. It wasn't mine in the first place. Now I kind of see all of them. I think all of them are very precious, but I get it. I get it now. I get like kind of like what the references are. But that violent firefight, I was never a big fan of violent action.
I'm obsessed with her other episode that she directs, so
yeah. No, I agree more so, but yeah, this once I'm thinking about this more in terms of what violence is actually doing, if with it, the right hand and the right mind about it, then this is so interesting, because when people cross over the threshold through violence, they have a lot more to learn than if they simply crossed over the threshold willingly or innocently or whatever, when you cross over innocently, you're like basically this vessel that can be filled with so much knowledge and so much, like you're just ready to just learn. You're a child.
What this is showing us is that he has to unlearn all of this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Especially because his community, which is another big part of the hero's journey, his community has to help him, and they have to abandon their home as well. So he has hurt everyone, and he has uprooted his entire community for the sake of this child through all of this violence that happens. And he's going to have to, it's like if somebody just like You know, somebody was putting together this puzzle, and you came about, and you just like tossed all the pieces everywhere, and you threw some into like trees and buried some in the ground, and like they're gonna have to go and they're gonna have to find all those puzzle pieces and put everything back together.
Because the elixir is what our Mandalorian needs, but also what the Mandalorians need. The final elixir at the end of the show.
Yes.
That is what I'm talking about. What is going to heal him and his community is what he left through the threshold with to begin with. Like, what are the problems that he left in his wake? He destroyed the community he was in. He destroyed his family, his clan, his creed. He destroyed their ability to hide, their ability to be safe. And he is on the run. He doesn't have a home. He doesn't have belonging. He needs to solve all of those. He did, in the first season, repair the community that he had been in. Mm-hmm. We see that at the end. There's like practically a rainbow in the background at the end. Everybody's like, you got rid of the Empire. Yay! It's practically a parade. Griff was like, you made this place not quite so bad. Good job.
Yep. But there is gonna be this reconciliation though, because the way that he left aesthetically was a certain way, and I talked about this too in my video because I'm starting to think about this a lot, is like poetically, right? Poetically, the restoration of that community. You have to be able to see all of those people come back, and you have to be able to see all those people come back to peace and a new community without violence and without them having to be bounty hunters, you know? That's what I'm hoping for. It might be a little bit, I might be a little bit too much wishful thinking, but I'm hoping that this is sort of this, let's be caretakers of orphans as opposed to, you know, bounty hunters, basically, is what they are at this point.
Yeah,
so
basically, let's move on from needing our children to be trained as soldiers, right? So this is like part of a sin on the galaxy, that the Mandalorians don't have the ability to be creators of art and violent. Because that's something that we learned in Rebels and in the Clone Wars, is that they're artists and warriors. And it's really, really important that you have both. And that's why Sabine is so awesome.
Totally.
Just to say that.
Totally. Yeah.
On to episode 4, which starts out, and we get this like very interesting symbolic violence that happens right off the start of the show.
Ooh,
where we have these like, I don't know, krill or like, shrimp-like creatures. And they are like violently ripped from their peaceful little like, ponds and, fished away.
Yeah. And in that very like Star Wars-y way, it's showing us that the death has to happen in order for more life to continue. Sort of thing. And like the blue in the dyes of the clothes shows that they're using them more for eating. They're using them for everything in their lives. This is their way of life, and life comes with violence. It comes with disrupting another life. And within that exact same scene, they're lives
attacked.
Yeah, their lives are interrupted. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that,
so it's it's the metaphor of the always a bigger fish type thing, and the microcosm is the macrocosm. It's very Star Wars.
It's very Star Wars. And it's really fun too, because this episode was also directed by a woman.
Bryce Dallas Howard. Yeah.
And I always think about her as the redhead from Mad Men, but yeah.
That's not her though.
It's not her. I know. Actually, I figured that out recently, and I had to correct myself, and I totally forgot about that. So you can just cut that part out. No, yeah, 'cause she looks a lot like her. So I always like mix her up, but yeah.
I always I see so many parallels to at least the aesthetic of this location with M. Night Shyamalan's The Village, which Bryce Dallas Howard was actually in. And I was like, I wonder if she was influenced by that a little bit when it came to this episode itself. I don't know.
She had to have been. Because I saw that too, and I thought it was really weird, because I was like, oh, this is like so... Yeah, but like there's no character like her in it, so I don't know. That's really interesting. Yeah, so that's interesting to me, that this whole thing was done by a woman, and the fact that so much of the violence it's a lot of it's implied. Like, a lot of it is not really, like, it's not like hyper realistic. It's not realistic at all. It actually reminds me of if anybody's seen the show Terra Nova. It was like one season, canceled after the first season. But it was very much like this family-friendly show. Like, and it felt very family-friendly. Like, more so than the other episodes. It felt very, very family-friendly. So yeah, I thought about that a lot while watching it, especially with, there was that scene where the two, I don't know what you call the bad guys in this episode, but they're drinking like that blue shiny liquid stuff, and then I think Mando comes in and like shoots them. But like all of this happens sort of at an angle, or sort of like off screen, or sort of like in a way that you can't really see what happens. Most of the violence that is done is like not in your face. And it's
off in the distance. Yeah.
And you have like a feeling it's not like killing them. You have a feeling that it's just knocking them out. Set lasers to stun sort of thing.
I would say that the biggest violent scene actually is the direct violence between Cara Dune and Din Djarin, our Mandalorian, in the alleyway. But it's broken up by our little innocent drinking his bone broth looking on.
Yeah, that's the balance. That's the balance that has to be had there. There needed to be an exhale.
Yeah, exactly. And so, like, the violence serves a narrative purpose. He saves the village. The walker itself looks kind of like an ogre. It's all painted up. You know, it has this very fantasy feel. The creatures themselves that are attacking the village look like orcs or ogres or something out of fantasy. Yeah. It has this like otherworldliness to it. And in the end, it is violence that pulls our hero back on his journey. Yeah. Because he realizes that no matter where he goes, no matter where the child goes, he will be found.
Yeah, the violence is following him. So he can't get away from the violence by going to a place of nurturing, because he's bringing it with him. Because again, that's the binary. That's the balance of the violence and innocence, is that it will always be there if he continues to live the life he's living. And he's as of that moment, he wasn't ready to truly give up the life that he had been living. And we see that he doesn't actually give that up until later on, and there's some symbolic things that happen to make that like happen in this story, and it's fascinating. The next episode is the one where we have Tatooine, and he goes to Tatooine to visit I don't know, he breaks down or gets shot down randomly over Tatooine. Yeah. He has to go fix his ship, so he lands there, and this has probably got the worst examples of violence in the whole show. I would say so. First of all, we have the violence done against the woman of color in the show. Yeah. Who is seemingly killed, right? But then
she's not dead.
I don't think she's dead either. But then we also have an act of violence where it actually does, like, the Mando does kill someone to defend the child, and that particular act of violence is done very much more realistically than I think a lot of the other violence is done in the show. Because and there's some tension in the music and whatnot, but there's no like grand celebration of it. Like, it's not like, oh, the hero defeated the villain. It was kind of sad. No. It was very like,
anticlimactic.
Anticlimactic.
Right? Like, yeah. It served a narrative purpose, but in our minds as viewers, we felt like there could have been other narrative choices, and so we're kind of left going, okay, so it wasn't symbolic, and it wasn't structural, and it wasn't, maybe the best narrative choice, but it happened. And that's when you can tell. And I think this is a really good example to show like when it's done well and when it's not done well. It's not done well. And so we're like, huh, and if you're left going, huh, at the end, or when the violence happens, you're like, why did that need to happen that way? Then you understand that it missed
something.
Yeah,
because I think that the death of the young male character was not unnecessary. Like, sure, the death means something. However, it wasn't executed in a way that is comfortable. And I think that it's the same thing with the character played by Ming-Na Wan. Yeah, with her seeming death, like what looked like her death. I still think she's alive. Yeah, it's the same kind of thing. It's like that didn't hit right for people because it was very realistic and it was like a shot in the gut. Like it wasn't stylistically done. There was no symbolism behind it. So yeah, I could argue that there's symbolism in the killing of the young man. But again, that episode had already had her sort of death in it. So it felt it felt a little different for Star Wars. It felt a little in your face.
I don't know that we've seen that many women die directly or be shot, etc., in that direct way in Star Wars.
Not so unless it's like they do like this funny like sway thing where they like, oh, they get hit by blasters, and it's like, again, it's like this weird romantic way of like falling and
being shot and falling. Yeah, like it was very visceral, I think is what you're looking for from a term perspective. Yeah,
I agree.
In many ways, I love this episode because it feels the most George Lucas.
Yeah.
And I've talked about that a lot. But it does still have some, cinematic problems.
Yeah.
And I think that that's important to acknowledge as well.
Yeah.
All right. On to the coolest psychological episode from a violence perspective. The Prisoner.
The Prisoner.
Episode 6. Directed by Rick Famuyiwa, who kills this one.
It's so good. It's so good. Yeah, talk about like a complete like 180 from the previous episode in terms of how violence is used, because in this episode there is visceral violence, but it is not actually done like on camera.
Yeah.
So if you think about it,
it's done horror movie style.
It's done horror movie style, yes. You don't see someone get shot in the gut and fall backwards. You see someone disappear from the frame and something terrible has happened.
Yeah, or like the doors shut on them and then they're knocked out, or like they get dragged away, kicking and screaming. Yeah, it's done horror movie style, which does something symbolically to us. It's like the monster in the dark, right?
Oh, yeah.
Our Mandalorian throughout the course of the episode is facing his, internal shadows, right? He's facing the different aspects of himself, and basically he becomes the monster to put them in their place. That's what happens in the episode. It's fascinating.
And
he doesn't kill any of them except for the one guy.
We've exclaimed so much about this one. It's just so much fun to talk about. It's so much fun to talk about. But yeah, like the violence at the beginning of the episode starts out as like Mando puts the innocent child away into the little room, right? He hides.
And he's trapped and he's locked away.
Yeah. He like, it's almost like because these two are melding and bonding, he's like putting away the innocent side of himself. And he has disrupted that binary. And then he goes off with all these other violent figures. And, of course, the violent figures find that innocence and they try to harm it. They try to hurt it. And that sets Mando on his violent, rampage, which I talked about this before, but I was super concerned about because I was like, oh no, he's killing all of the sides of himself. Like he's killing all of the from a psychoanalysis point of view, he's killing all these sides of himself, and he shouldn't be. He should be putting parts of him away, and dealing with them in a different way. And of course, at the end of it, you find out he didn't kill them except for the traitor, which he did through a manipulation as opposed to direct contact, right? That violence was also not direct. It was not aesthetically visceral. It was an explosion, right? At the very, very end of the show. So, and I also find it interesting, by the way, that it's like the writers that like shot those missiles.
Yeah. It's three of the directors.
Yeah.
Right? Because it was Dave and Deborah and Rick.
Yeah, sorry, the directors. Yeah. So they're the ones who like killed. They're the ones who did the violence. And it's just so interesting because it's like, it's so meta in a way.
Yeah.
Mando,
it's very meta.
Yeah. Like Mando didn't kill anybody in that episode. So
he just let death happen.
He let death happen.
Yeah, except for to our droid friend, which, some will argue whether whether droids are alive or not. But
I still don't really know exactly where they're going with that because it is interesting. Again, it's like I was programmed for
no. The droid that flies the ship.
I know. Yeah. But I'm like, I just don't know where they're going with that theme. Because because he put away the other parts of himself that were monsters, and he had the traitor part of himself killed because he now has a different allegiance. And what was the droid part of him? Well, it was the thing that was programmed, right? And so he had killed
to kill
that part,
which is a rebirth, right? It's I am not programmed to kill. I am programmed to be alive. I like that interpretation. I still don't. I get where you're coming from. I think I will think it. I didn't think. Yeah, sometimes things gotta die, as Jon Favreau pointed out in one of the gallery episodes. He's like, it's important. Sometimes it's important that people die. Yeah. It's like, okay. It's so hard to accept that. I know from a certain lens because you see it so much used in so many ways, and yeah, it's I. But there's a difference between. Just like using violence, there's a difference between doing it well and making it mean something and just doing it. Yeah, definitely. But regardless, all right. Totally different than the previous episode. My favorite episode, episode 7. This is your favorite? This is your favorite. Okay. This is my favorite. Yeah, because he realizes he needs to go back, right? He needs to go back to the planet, enter through the gate, go back on his journey home. Yes. But he needs to gather his allies. Yes. And so he goes and gathers his allies. And amongst that is a droid, again, carrying that metaphor from the last episode, a droid who was programmed to kill, being rechanged into a droid who is programmed to be a nursemaid. Oh, wait, was this Deborah Chow too? No, Deborah Chow did. Deborah Chow did this episode. Yeah. Oh, so she did that really amazing scene with IG-11. Yes. Oh my god, that's amazing! I wonder where she got that inspiration from. I haven't watched all the gallery. She said it like in the gallery episode. She said it was incredibly hard to do this scene. Wow, I haven't finished that show yet, but I will. Yeah. And you get the amazing voiceover by Quill talking about being reprogrammed and learning how to do things and learning from scratch how to do things again. And it's very much a conversation about not only, becoming a person, but also in some ways becoming a parent. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to, yeah. You're going to screw up, and you need to teach yourself how to do it. Yeah.
Oh,
right?
that's so sweet. I do love that idea of, like, IG-11 is the representation of what Mando was and what he can be.
Mm-hmm.
And that is that violence binary again, showing up, that balance. And IG-11 didn't have a partner. He definitely, like, represents that binary. And it's just so interesting that, like, he is there to act as, like, a representation, a symbolic representation of everything that is probably going to happen to Mando. He kills me. All those scenes absolutely kill me.
I'm not going to actually accept that he's going to sacrifice himself at the end, though.
Mm-mm.
I think he's going to be reborn, Phoenix-wise, right? He's going to be reborn, and become the Phoenix, right? Because that is the story. Like, that's what happens.
I won't accept
that moment.
Yeah, I won't accept if
he's born in fire.
No, yeah, because, like, IG-11 was limited. Like, I was fixing to say a minute ago, IG is limited because he doesn't have a complement. He doesn't have that binary. He doesn't have a partner. He doesn't have a community. He doesn't have a loved one. Like, he doesn't have anything to protect him, essentially, or to balance him. And Din Djarin does. Like, he has that binary with the child and with his community. He's got it all over the place, honestly. But yeah, IG-11 didn't have that. So his sacrifice, it wasn't that it was necessary. It was just that it was almost inevitable in a way, because that was his only thing that he lived for.
We don't actually get a lot of violence in this episode in particular, right? Because it's kind of like we get the reprogramming, we get the planning, and then we get the sneaking in and
we get the death of the mentor. That happens at the end of this episode.
Yeah.
Queel.
We get we get that, and that's really heavy, but it's really the only violence that happens is when they're sent after.
I think that's pretty
the child.
I think that's pretty brilliant, because at the beginning of the episode they established that the violent actor of the previous episodes, like the one that was programmed for violence, has now been programmed to nurture. And then at the end of that, it has the person that reprogrammed him die in a very, like, it's very emotional and it's very heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And it is violent. It is essentially violent with the child ending up face down on the ground, without anyone to care for him. And it is again,
and symbolic.
It's symbolic. It is that aesthetic violence used correctly, and it is also providing for that balance that is needed.
Mm-hmm. And then we get our last episode, which starts out with our two bike troopers, scout troopers, and their comedy routine.
Yeah. That's due to what's his name? Oh my god. A Thor Ragnarok director.
Taika Waititi.
Yeah, Taika Waititi. Yeah, he is brilliant in, like, that area. But yeah, this one doesn't really have. This one has some big. It has a lot of fire violence, which is appropriate because of the Phoenix symbolism and whatnot.
Yeah. Well, and also it has the stylistic nanny droid taking care of the child.
That's the most violent part in the whole episode, I think.
Yeah, it is. It's massively violent, but it's entirely aesthetically pleasing. It's fun.
Yeah. Yeah. This is probably...
And we see his little ears going in the wind, and he's like, yay! Right? Because it's like the innocence and the violence together. And all of the stuff with IG-11 or IG going through, the town and, like, destroying all of these stormtroopers and mercenaries and mercs and bounty hunters. Like, it's all, like, has that binary in place because he has the child on his chest.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such an interesting thing that this character is acting violently, but is caring and nurturing. Yeah. I think that the balance is had when he picks up that child, or when he goes to save the child, right? IG-11 can be violent when he is protecting someone. This goes with any character.
Yeah.
They can be as violent as they can be if they are protecting someone who is innocent. The audience will accept it, they will praise it, they will love it. I know this is a little out of left field, but you remember with the movie Taken?
Yep.
It's it's like about a father saving. It's like,
you mean Liam Neeson or Qui-Gon Jinn?
Thank you. Thank you. I forgot his name for a minute. Yeah, Liam Neeson saving his daughter from a sex trafficking ring, and the things that he does in that movie to hurt men are just incredible, absolutely incredible. And I remember watching it and being like, wait, are people okay with this? Like, isn't this inhumane? And I was in high school and I was like, this is pretty inhumane. And this like goes against like the Geneva Convention, I'm pretty sure. Like, and that sort of thing. But people accept it because he was not doing it as a part of entertainment necessarily, not in their minds. He was doing it to save his daughter. And having that, like, this is like Die Hard, this is like any of those types of movies, those types of stories, they're doing it to save someone. We can pretty much accept any kind of violence.
Yeah. And I think that of the moments this just makes me think of like The Last Jedi and how incredibly violent the moment that Kylo kills Snoke is, and like visceral, right? But because he does it to save Rey, everyone's like, okay, now he's done something good.
It's so upsetting that
and they accept it.
Yeah, that moment is still somewhat misinterpreted by some people that say that he was being opportunistic because they totally misinterpret his character. But once you start looking at it from the perspective of he was saving her, the opinion changes like automatically. It's just a completely different
and like
read.
From what's happening in the aesthetic of the film and that moment, she is innocent at his mercy, and he chooses not to kill her. He chooses to kill the bad guy, and that's the binary right there.
Yeah, that is the binary.
We got off topic. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Marie Claire's like, we're not talking about the sequel trilogy. No, it's
sorry.
It's
I really love that moment, and that is like prime example of like what happens with this binary.
Yeah,
you know,
if it's protecting someone, it is absolutely accepted, no matter how outrageous that violence is. I mean, like, Snoke getting cut in half is pretty outrageous. IG-11 shooting and hurting. I mean, he kind of did a lot more damage than just like killing them, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, it's the most violent scene in the whole season.
Yeah. And that was very purposeful.
But why is it acceptable to us?
Because he's saving
the baby is attached to his chest.
Yeah. Yeah. And also...
And he's also saving the heroes too, right? He's coming in, he is the cavalry in that moment, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Din Djarin already had his moment of, I'm going to save this child no matter what. But he was faced with more than just adversaries. He was faced with his community and all these other things. So he couldn't be so violent as IG-11. But then IG-11 comes in and like fulfills that role for us. Like, I will do anything in order to protect this child. And at that moment, like, the audience is on board because we've seen enough of it to say, yes, absolutely, whatever you need to do, save the child.
Yes, exactly.
That's so funny.
I do want to point out there is one moment in episode 7 that I didn't point out, which is when the child himself becomes violent.
Oh my god, I totally forgot about that. When he tries to hurt Cara?
Yeah.
Cara Dune? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's gonna be dealt with in the next season for sure.
Yeah, there's a few things that we're mostly done. I mean, like, you know, there's the end fight at the end that's very dramatic, but it's all in the effort to save the child, and so everything is good. But he had to like leave behind the child to do that, but it's all in a rescuing kind of way. And then, you know, we see that Moff Gideon has the dark saber at the end, which to me indicates this is kind of like a Chekhov's gun type situation. Din Djarin our Mandalorian needs a saber of his own.
Mm-hmm.
He needs a weapon to fight the dark version of himself out there.
Yeah.
His adversary is out there, and he's going to fight him, and he's going to need a lightsaber. And then we're also going to deal with the escalating violence of the child.
Yeah.
He will become violent again.
Yeah, because apparently he has so much power that his violence limit is apparently very high, I would assume. So
yeah,
it'll be interesting.
Yeah. So is there anything else that you want to like talk high level, or maybe summarize what we've just kind of talked about?
I mean, it'll be we didn't really talk a ton about like kind of the more overarching themes of like what's actually happening and like Mando and whatnot. But I don't know, like I don't know if we even have enough to go off on at this point, because it's speculating at this point. It's speculating, and also like thinking about the way that they did the first season. I wonder if that's why, like, how many directors are in this next season compared to the first? I don't think it was as many, right? Like Deborah Chow's not on board for the second season.
No, she's working on Kenobi, right? So
right.
Okay, so we have Rick Famuyiwa, Jon Favreau, Dave Filoni. It looks like John might direct an episode. Carl Withers is directing an episode. Robert Rodriguez and Peyton Reed.
Interesting.
So less women in general.
Yeah.
It looks like.
People were saying this a while back when some of these came out and were concerned. I'm a little concerned too, but at the same time, it's like, I feel like the first episode was very inconsistent with, or the first season was very inconsistent with the way that it handled the violence. I do think there, like episode to episode, maybe that's why the general audience wasn't so sold on this show as were the Star Wars fans. Because it was different interpretations of Star Wars, which is fine, but like it's one show. It should have like some consistencies, especially in the way that it deals with this. So yeah. I don't know. We'll see how they handle it. I hope they have some women in the writers' room at least, because my goodness, they're dealing with some pretty intense themes. So
absolutely, Robert Rodriguez is a really interesting choice.
Wait, what has he done? I'm pulling it up.
From Dusk Till Dawn, Alita.
No.
Sin City. But he also did Spy Kids.
I love From Dusk Till Dawn. I love Spy Kids. That's so funny. Oh my lord.
Yeah.
Interesting.
He did like Grindhouse, Death Proof.
Alita's like the bane of my existence, but
yeah.
Oi. I mean, we already knew like they're on thin ice. Let's be honest here. They're on thin ice. But from just watching the first season alone, like I believe it's in good hands with Dave and John. I just hope they continue on with what they're doing. I hope they stick to the themes that they proposed in the first season. I think they will.
Carl Withers is really interesting.
Oh, I love him. He's very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm happy Rick is back too. Rick Famuyiwa. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. That was good.
Yeah. I don't really know Peyton Reed all that well. I'm just going to look him up. Oh, Ant-Man, Bring It On, Down with Love.
Wow, Down with Love is like one of my favorite movies of all time. I'm into this. I want to watch that movie again.
You're so funny.
It's one of my comfort movies. I totally forgot about that. It's like one of my comfort movies. Yeah, we'll definitely have a lot to say.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Again, it's not like men can't write or direct women and more feminine narratives.
Yes.
We're not saying that.
Yeah. We all know, we all know that just from our opinions on The Last Jedi.
Yeah.
But we have concerns.
I just hope that they understand the violence innocent binary, which so far they do.
It seems like it.
Yes. We would like to see more women, please.
Yes. Agreed.
Like, to kind of summarize this whole conversation, we just wanted to show you how symbolic violence is in our media, and specifically in The Mandalorian. You can see very clearly how it's used and what it means to the story, to the characters, and to the, overall meaning that we need to take away from this.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah. We're gonna have a lot of fun talking about this show for the second season when it starts airing, because I know we're all ready for it.
Yeah, exactly.
We have a lot of stuff to talk about. Like, per episode, I'm going to be analyzing the bleep out of this.
Get your analyzing pants on, Ty. We're going analyzing. We're like the sisterhood of the Mandalorian pants or something.
Oh yeah, for sure.
All right, Ty, where can people find you if they are looking for you and your amazing work online?
Sure. You can find me at Wit and Folly on YouTube, or you can find me at Black_TYM on Twitter. You can also find me at Wit_Folly on Twitter for my YouTube Twitter. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for sticking with us for this episode, and we look forward to having you tune in to our deep dive on The Mandalorian for each episode, Once Upon a Time in the Outer Rim, available here. Cheers. Thank you for listening to What the Force. I'm Marie-Claire Gould, your host. Our music is orchestral music composed by Christy Carew for What the Force. We have a Patreon at patreon.com/whattheforce. We thank all our patrons, especially those who love and are obsessed with What the Force: Brad, Cheryl, Melody, Night Huntress, In Wild Space, Felicia, How Rude, Anna Perez, Macau Mom, Neil, James, Joe Allen D, Christian Luca, Josh Johnson, and Scott C. Make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube or leave a 5-star review on iTunes or other podcast apps. It helps others find the show. Check out our new channel on YouTube, What the Fiction. You can connect with us on Twitter at What the Force Show, What the Force Podcast on Facebook, or on our website, where we have expanded our content to include reviews, metas, and articles, whattheforce.ca, or on our Discord. Links are in the liner note. Feel free to reach out and start a conversation. Cheers.